everyone. Thanks for joining us. Calvin, from where you sit atop the nation's largest utility company, what are the clean energy initiatives you're most excited about?
Well, first off, good morning, everyone. And it is, it's a pleasure to be here. And as you can sit back and when you think about the transformation that is taking place around the energy industry, I'm proud that Exelon, as the largest T&D company serving 10 million customers, has an opportunity to shape that future. So when you think about shaping the future, I think in terms of collaborating with our customers to ensure that we meet their needs. And that involves resiliency of the grid. That involves meeting customer expectations to connect them to clean energy. And also that affordability quotient that has to be there. Because as a utility company, you can appreciate we serve everyone. And we wanted a seat at the table to engage in this debate, so we initially came out with our Path to Clean initiative, where we have said we're going to reduce net zero emissions, eliminate them by 2050. We're going to electrify our transportation fleet 30% by 2025, 50% by 2030. Now, having said all of that, it requires and allowed us to be at that table to work with all of our jurisdictions to drive these results. We are best positioned when you think about the jurisdictions that we serve, from District of Columbia, the nation's capital, to Baltimore, to Chicago, Philadelphia, Wilmington, Delaware, and Atlantic City, New Jersey. Some of the richest and most diverse cities in this country, but at the same time, some of those jurisdictions that have the most challenges. And how we step up to meet that challenge is really in driving clean energy future, because we know where the impact to those communities really lie.
Great, excellent. Rudy, National Grid has set goals to reduce emissions in the Northeast by 40% by 2030 and by 95% by 2050. How are you planning to meet those goals and get businesses and consumers to change the way they consume energy?
So good morning, everyone. That was a little louder than I thought it was going to be. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Liz. So National Grid, we own and operate utilities in the northeastern U.S. and also in the U.K. In the U.S., we have about 7 million customers. In the U.K., 8 million customers. And when we think about that energy transition, a couple of key points I would make. That is, we think about the big transformational shifts we've got to move forward on. One of which is a big transformational shift around our electric networks, making sure those networks are an enabler and not an inhibitor of that energy transition, making sure people can connect their EVs, making sure we can decarbonize the heating sector by moving some more of the heating sector to electricity, and making sure our networks are there to integrate renewables that we need across our networks. The second big transformational shift is our natural gas networks. We own and operate natural gas networks in New York City, upstate New York, and in Massachusetts. And we are laser focused on ensuring that we keep that network around, albeit blending new things into that network. We can decarbonize the natural gas network by blending in over the long-term green hydrogen, nearer term blending in renewable natural gas. The third big transformational shift is around customer centricity. To your point, how do we bring customers along this journey with us and make sure that we're doing it in an affordable fashion? And finally, it's around operational excellence. As Calvin said, as utilities, yes, we have to make sure we're delivering that clean energy future, but we have to do it safely, we have to do it reliably, each and every day for all of our consumers. And at the end of the day, that energy transition, we have to make sure it's clean, it's fair, and it's affordable.
Thanks, Rudy. Juan, tell us about AlphaStruxure and tell us why you think your model of energy as a service works better and makes sense compared to traditional models of energy infrastructure.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be with you here today and be with the colleagues. Look, it's super excited to share a bit about AlphaStruxure. So, AlphaStruxure is a company that we created between Schneider Electric and the Carlyle Group in 2019. So, we had really come off of over a decade that Schneider Electric had been innovating technologies around microgrids, enabling microgrids, optimizing different renewable resources, integrating to the load, integrating to the grid, building over 300 plus microgrids around the world. And we got to a point where we said, look, why don't we see more commercial deployments of these types of technologies and applications? So when we looked at that, we really came on to one, capital allocation, the risk and complexity of these projects. And so then we took a step back and said, okay, now let's look at how we can innovate in terms of the business model. That's when we came together with the Carlyle Group and we brought together a techno-economic solution to the marketplace through a purpose-built company that would design, build, own, and operate behind-the-meter energy systems, looking to help our customers really accelerate their energy transition by designing specific tailor-made systems that would address their decarbonization objectives that they have specifically in their use case, to look at their resilience requirements and put in place a system that delivered that resilience, that reliability, and in many cases, availability. Right? Because some of the earlier topics that were discussed was the scale of demand growth. So we really are going to need all different types of actions to meet that. So back to the question, why energy as a service versus traditional CapEx? Look, it brings as an option to deploy these types of systems the ability to bring capital and address the capital allocation need, and very importantly, blend that with the expertise to be able to design, build, own, and operate these systems over their whole 20, 30, 40-year life cycle. So it is complementary and really addresses the challenges in scaling that we face.
Okay. Calvin, Exelon's investing $29 million over the next 5 years, $29 billion, excuse me, over the next 5 years in energy infrastructure. Break down for us where that will go on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big number. When you think of $29 billion over our long-range plan, first and foremost, the majority of our investment goes to the reliability and resiliency of our system. So when you think about those 100-year storms that are happening every couple of years now, and impacting you as customers far greater than they ever did, we automatically have to think about the new standards that are required for building codes. We have to think about the new pole standards to withstand higher greater pressure of wind. We have to look at flooding zones to lift our substations. So that's first and foremost. Then we look into and deploying technology to enable our customers to make this transition into the future of clean energy. How to connect them to distributed energy resources. Juan just talked about what they're doing around microgrids, readying the system to do that. So it's not an either or, it's truly an and. And then transmission build out. Rudy and I were just talking about the transmission build out that's required across the country to connect distributed energy resources nationwide. That is something that we have to do. So when you look at our infrastructure investment, that's it. And you cannot forget security, both physical and cyber. Now that's something you as customers don't see and feel, but you know it when it's not there. You don't want to get that email from your utility company talking about your personal data has been breached. So again, think of the jurisdictions that I serve. The nation's capital, Maryland, Chicago, Philadelphia. I mean, so when you talk about some of those most vulnerable and targeted areas, that sits right in our backyard. And when I had a conversation with the chairman of a commission 2 weeks ago, and of course, affordability is driving that. But what I said to him, I said, Mr. Chairman, it's $29 billion over our LRP, but understand that demand is not decreasing. What that future investment is just going to be different. And I need you to walk on this journey with me because your standards, our customer standards, haven't diminished at all, and you're asking for more. What I have to do is figure out how to give you that more and also retain affordability for every customer within our system.
Rudy, a lot of companies have committed to ensuring that their switch to sustainable energy doesn't benefit some communities at the expense of others. How is National Grid helping companies along those efforts, and can you give us some concrete examples?
Yeah, so as I stated before, we have to make sure this energy transition is clean, it's fair, and it's affordable. And I think you're really pressing on the fair component, right? How do we make sure no communities get left behind in this transition? Listen, it's the end of 2022, and we're still talking about some people don't have broadband access, right? We can't have the same thing happen on the energy transition. So one of the things that we're looking at is making sure that environmental justice communities and communities that have lower income also have access to the clean energy sources that wealthier areas can have access to. We're doing something in partnership with New York State for low and moderate income consumers to get the benefit of solar. We call it Solar for All, where there'll be a community solar facility. People who are apartment dwellers who apply for this and who are eligible will still get that credit as if they were participating in that community solar array. That's one example. But the other example is, let's be clear, Calvin talked about as well as Juan, talked about the investments that are going to be needed for us to move along this journey on the clean energy transition. Investments in infrastructure, investments in new technology, investments in deploying those technologies. Those are going to need a workforce, and we have to make sure that communities, all communities, are ready and they're trained and they see a pathway for those new clean energy jobs. One concrete example that we're doing right here in New York City is we partnered with a New York Housing Authority, and this is public housing in New York City, where we, with some other partners, formed something we're calling the Clean Energy Academy. Now, the New York City Housing Authority has to invest about $500 million to retrofit the public housing to cleaner forms of energy, to do more energy efficiency, et cetera. The Clean Energy Academy is going to initially target 100 people who live in public housing. We're going to train them on the new technologies that they're going to be deploying in their buildings, and then matching them up with the contractors who are going to be hired to do that. Mm-hmm. That's the way to make sure people have pathways to the new opportunities that's also going to come about from the transition.
Juan, as you work on electric transit fleets, tell us a little bit about the challenges working with municipalities versus private companies and how your conversations differ, pitching to those different types of customers.
Look, maybe I'll back up and talk a little bit about fleets, right? Because fleets are an important segment. Transportation, 29% of all emissions. In the U.S., we have 23 million medium and heavy-duty vehicles. And just to get a little bit of notion on scale, within that, there's a subset of transit buses, right? And so we have about 78,000 transit buses. And actually, next week on Monday, we're going to have the ribbon cutting, where we've designed and constructed now a depot for Montgomery County, Maryland, where we're converting a diesel fleet of 70 buses to electric buses. So this is a little over 4 megawatts of charging capacity. It's an integrated system, because when you go from a diesel to an electric, you go from what does not have to be an integrated system to what has to be an integrated system. So we have charging vehicles, we have charger management software, we have on-prem renewables, we actually have a battery energy storage system, and are collaborating with Pepco, one of Calvin's companies, where we have a demand response. So we're also participating in the grid. So we're transitioning these fleets, right? And to whether it's public or private, to scale up by 2030 to the commitment that Calvin has made of 50% of his fleet, and you take, whether it's the transit bus fleet or the medium and heavy duty vehicle fleet, and you just scale that. We need to build thousands of what we've just built one. And whether that is that the utility is going to power those depots directly, which in some cases you'll have the capacity, installed capacity to do that, or in other cases we'll put an on-prem system or a hybrid system. So the difference between the public and the private fleet, the use case is the same. The processes sometimes differ in terms of procurement and contracting. Some are easier than others. But the use case is the same, and the need to scale and having the skill set and capability to scale is key.
Great. Calvin, as more consumers buy electric vehicles and as companies switch to electric fleets, as we just spoke about, the demand on the grid is increasing. How is Exelon preparing to support that shift to EVs?
It's a great question. And what Juan didn't tell you all is that that partnership with us wasn't the easiest because it's new for us. And how you engage your utilities in the future needs to be very different than how you engage the utilities today. Engaging utilities in the future, as Juan and I were talking at dinner last night, is really bringing the utilities in earlier. Trusting us enough to know that we can be part of that strategic plan because nothing happens overnight for us. And it's a different muscle for us to sit back and partner and get the installations in a timely manner. And I tell my team all the time is that we do not want to be the reason that your project does not get off on time and on budget. And we're glad we got there, but we take that as a lesson learned and say we'll develop that muscle. As more EVs are coming on the road, what we have done within our system, we recognize the grid was built to flow one way. Now it's going to be a bidirectional flow, and how are we preparing? A big reason, not only because our jurisdictions were demanding a cleaner environment, but also we were electrifying our fleet to learn. We were learning how those vehicles were going to have an impact on our system. We were the first utility in the country to deploy and buy electric buses to shuttle our employees to different work sites. One, because we wanted to showcase it, but two, we also wanted to learn the charging rhythm. What happens? We incentivize customers to charge at non-peak hours. You know, we could do a whole nother session on the California grid a couple of weeks ago, about a month or so ago, when it was at its peak. What happened in driving down demand response, right? So we are doing that. I had the opportunity to also co-chair the National Electric Highway Coalition with EEI. Part of that process is ensuring that you as customers have a consistent, customer-friendly experience when you stop and get charging along the highways, as well as reduce that range anxiety. Because those are real issues as it comes to transportation electrification and making it seamless for you that no matter where you stop and no matter what electric vehicle you have, you know what the experience is going to be and you have charging stations set up. Right now, as Exelon Utilities, we are scheduled by 2025 to have over 7,000 charging stations located across Maryland, Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, and the District of Columbia. That's significant when you think of that mid-Atlantic corridor and what that means for you as customers when you're driving an EV.
Great. Companies of all sizes and scales over the past few years have had challenges filling gaps in their workforce. It's been very tough amid a tight labor market. I'd love to hear from each of you, where are those gaps in your workforces and how are you working to fill those? Let's start with Juan.
Look, the first way in building up a company that we look at this is to design a purpose-built company that is focused on really driving greenhouse gas reduction. So creating a culture, creating a purpose and a vision, so that's number one. So people want to come to work for us, right? And then number two is around our investment and development of our talent and the whole work environment. And then really leveraging our whole networks of the people that we have in the company and our broader network in order to be able to identify the talent and then target and attract the talent that we bring in the company. And really staying current on the technology and developing and expanding the domain expertise.
Great.
It starts, Rudy talked about workforce academies across all of our jurisdictions. We're training people in the communities to lean in and encourage them, where we've trained over 20,000 people over the last several years to either work for an Exelon company or one of our suppliers. But we took another step. We also looked at the new generation of engineers and to ensure that there's a diverse workforce coming into it. We partner with STEM academies. We created STEM academies. We provided scholarships to HBCUs. We encouraged women to get into STEM and funded their education, bringing them in. And I think the biggest thing that we've done that's different, and I would say this from an Exelon perspective, we've reached out to our high schools. We've recognized how important it is to hit young people before they choose another path, and sometimes that's the wrong path, and let them know that there's a place for them at one of our utility companies. And I will just use this as an anecdote. It's amazing how many young people in the District of Columbia, Baltimore, and Philadelphia never thought that they could have a career at PECO, BGE, or Pepco. Shame on us. So what we've done is gone directly into the high schools, provided them meaningful internships, and worked with them throughout those 4 years before we lose them in that process. And that's what I'm most proud of through this.
I agree with everything that my two colleagues on the stage have said. If I added anything, I would say we use this as an opportunity to generate real excitement about the sector. I've been in the energy sector for just over 30 years, and this is by and far the most exciting time we've ever seen in the sector. So when I go out and speak to, whether it's high school students or college students, I don't run the movie of this is what we do and this is how everything's perfect. Instead, I tell them about the challenges that I face, right? I tell them about I've got, 1 gigawatt of distributed resources in upstate New York that's connected onto the network, and it took us about 20 years to do that. And I've got 5 in the queue to get connected now. To do that, I need to build a digital twin so I could model the network so I can make these interconnections. So I need different types of skill sets. When they hear those challenges, we are going to do a joint venture with a German company to do some offshore wind off the coast of New York here. So if I'm somewhere and I could point out and say, you know what, in 5 years we're going to have 3 gigawatts of offshore wind out that window, enough to power 1 million homes, and we haven't started building it yet. That's a challenge. Okay. So one of the things we've seen is there's tremendous excitement because I think students see and people see what I see, and I think my colleagues up here see, and that is if you're working in the energy sector right now, you're part of changing the world.
Great. We have just enough time, I think, for one more quick question. I'd love to ask each of you, do you believe we will get to a zero emissions future? And if so, when? Let's just do kind of a rapid fire. Rudy, let's start with you.
I think we will get there. I don't want to put a specific time and date on the when because I always have debates. This is a transition. It's not a binary switch we're going through here. It is a transition, and we are starting on that transition. We're at the beginning of that transition. We're nowhere near the end of that transition.
Yes, but we have to do it the right way. And it may take longer than some in this room would like to do, but we can't leave anyone behind in that transition. And we must do it affordably because all of us need to make it together.
Yes, and the time for action is now, right? I mean, just look at what's going on in our world. We need to drive action with urgency today.
Okay. I'll throw it to Tracy for some questions.
Well, thanks. Speaking of action today, the looming energy crisis in Europe, wonder if there's, from your perspectives, if there are any silver linings in what appears to be a very concerning winter, and if there's any opportunities.
Look, there's opportunities in Europe that were not on our horizon. And the urgency of the situation has customers reaching out to us that, in the last month, pulling us as AlphaStruxure to take our solution to Europe. So I think 6 months ago, prior to the war, that was not in the cards or on the horizon. We didn't have those inbounds coming in. So the urgency is here, and it's looking for alternatives.
And Tracy, I would sit back and say what we've learned during the war is that, an opportunity has sparked that we're now having conversations around the security of the grid that was always there, but it came to the forefront overnight. And a lot of people started leaning into that conversation. And then I would also talk about the affordability quotient is real, because it was always pressures, but now with rising inflation, you're seeing the low to moderate income customers feel the pain more than many others. And now those are issues that are at the forefront in our local jurisdictions that we have to address.
I would just say, in the energy sector, we always wrestle with what's called the trilemma. You could have sustainability, you have to have affordability, you have to have reliability. I think the war in Ukraine and the inflation that we're seeing has really stressed that trilemma like it's never been stressed before, and it's exacerbated all three of those components. But to your question about opportunities, I think it gives us an opportunity to take a step back, look at some of the energy transition decisions that countries in Europe made, and see how is it faring for them when reliability is at the forefront right now this winter. So we can take some lessons learned from there. But also, I'm a big optimist. I also believe that innovation is always going to be key in finding new solutions. And we're seeing that today here, and I think hopefully they're going to see that across the world as well.
Great. Last question from me. As you think about green energy, what are the misconceptions that you might have the opportunity to clarify here today?
I'll go first. I would say the energy mix. People always often ask me, well, you've got investments in solar, offshore wind, batteries. Which one do you pick, or which one do you like? And I just basically say yes. We're going to need them all. Yeah. We're going to need green energy. We're also going to need fossil for quite a while. Yeah. Natural gas will be an energy carrier in this country and in many countries around the world for decades to come, because a lot of the renewables are weather-based solutions, and the wind isn't always blowing, the sun isn't always shining, and we need a very rapid way to dispatch power. So I think fossil, but cleaner versions of it, blending in green hydrogen, are going to play a key role. But my bottom line is, the misconception is we can go down the path of only green today. We'll get there. We're not there today.
I would sit back and say it is an integrated portfolio approach. When you look at Exelon, we're the largest T&D company, and gas is going to continue to play a part in this transition, as Rudy said, but it's that delivery system that is going to be core. As we talk about delivering renewable natural gas, as we talk about delivering hydrogen, making sure the systems are built and we don't narrowly define ourselves or we box ourselves into what technology is going to be working. We make short-term decisions that we have long-term consequences, because just for viability and getting there tomorrow.
Look, for me, the misconception would be around the transition from medium and heavy-duty vehicles from diesel to zero-emission vehicles. It is a complex transition, right? It's not a matter of, hey, the vehicle showed up, let me get a charger and we'll get everything from the grid. So the complexity of everything involved, that is a major system change. Absolutely can be done. The technology exists, but it's not trivial.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time
Thank
today
you.
and your insights.
Thank you.